Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And I just want to mention something that that was brought up in our Facebook group. If you haven't jumped in yet, Scott Athens, who is one of our very early adopters of the Facebook group, jumped right in. He just posted, I think it was just yesterday, that episode 42 was podcast gold.
Wait, was it 42? Or was it 42?
Oh, don't make me doubt myself. It was either 42 or 43.
See, you're not looking at the thing.
Oh, I can't look, and I can't go look at it right now unless you guys want to sit here for like 5 minutes while I...
So one of them, what you should take from that is one of them was podcast gold. It could have been 42.
But it might have been 43. Well, this is great because if somebody listens to it and they're like, you can go listen to the other one. Or you can just judge Scott's judgment.
I think that's really one of the points of the Facebook group is to judge Scott.
Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks, Scott. So there's a reference if you're looking for some other good episodes and you haven't caught either 42 or 43, jump on in. And you know what? Actually, we're making this even more complicated now because if you listen through Apple Podcasts on your phone, they have deleted, like you can't see the episode numbers. That's why we're still keeping them in the title. So they're there for now. But at some point, they're going to make us take those numbers out of the title, which is
inconvenient.
It is. They really have to get their act together. Anyway, let's move on to more important things.
Okay, let me thank our patrons. Tom Loveland at Mind Over Machines, Cat's Copy, the architecture firm of GWWO, and Marycraft Staffing and HR Solutions.
And since I've been telling the stories of late, I believe it's your turn.
Right. And I do have a story, lucky for us, because I know you'd have nothing to talk about if I said no.
7-minute episode. No,
yes.
You know me. I have 12 stories like ganged up waiting to be told.
So here's my story. And it goes back actually quite a long time. And just recently occurred
in the beginning.
It just recently occurred to me because something that happened, and I'll talk about that, made it front of mind. But this goes back to when my wife, Nikki, moved here from Oregon. We had been dating, and so she decided to move all the way out from Portland to Baltimore. And I know that's just unbelievable.
I bit my tongue. I was going to be like, for you? I was like,
yes,
just don't distract from the story.
It was the greatest sales job I ever did in my life. But she moved out here. And of course, in moving out here, she didn't have her circle of friends. And so I introduced her to not only my family, but my friends. And so each time we went out, she was meeting somebody new. And a couple times, not all the time, thankfully, but a couple times on the way home as we were driving back, and I would ask her what she thought, she would be irritated by the conversation that had taken place that evening. And I asked her why, and she said, because he didn't ask me any questions, or she didn't ask me any questions, whoever it was. Now, this was, I guess, 25 years ago now.
Yeah.
And I would talk to her about this, but I have to tell you that I had never heard that complaint before. And
at the time, we were a little bit like, whatever. Like,
yes, okay, I was. I was certainly...
It's one of those, I'm going to be empathetic because it bothers you and therefore it's important. But to be honest, I don't get it.
And I also know, how difficult it is to move across the country. She didn't know anybody. So I really wanted her to meet people and feel comfortable.
And I would also say, because this is something we have in common, you and I mean, neither one of us have any problems answering questions, but we tend to enjoy, we just inherently pathologically like to find out about people. So we're usually plenty happy just asking the questions.
Right. But I didn't notice.
Which is why you might not notice if somebody doesn't. Yeah.
Correct. So yes, I was empathetic, and I was upset that she was upset or didn't enjoy herself that evening or whatever. But I didn't understand the complaint itself. It didn't really resonate with me, even though we talked about it. And I came to understand that. And what brought this story front of mind, or top of mind, was recently I had a coffee with somebody who was he was a new contact, and we decided to go out to coffee just to talk about various things, whatever we had in common, and for networking purposes. And I came away from that. It was a perfectly fine conversation. Nobody said anything that upset the other person. It was fine.
And
that's the best way to say it. It was
awkward silences.
Not awkward silences. Nobody made any threats, overt or implicit, and it was fine. But I came away and I was trying to figure out, why did nothing resonate with me at all? Why was that like the networking equivalent of water? It had substance, but it was tasteless. And I was trying to figure that out. And I realized that I would ask a lot of questions. As you said, both of us tend to do that. But he didn't ask me anything. And it wasn't that I needed to be the center of attention. I wanted to talk for 4 hours about my firm and what I do and my thoughts and all that. But in the absence of that, there was really an absence of either connection or an attempt on his part to even forge a connection, and that bothered me.
Yeah, no, oh my God, I think about this all the time, because whenever I am bothered by that, I'm sort of perplexed by it. So I end up thinking about it a lot, because I know that I am someone who just as soon not be like, I know I love asking the questions, and I know that I don't inherently have a need to be the center of attention. So I'm like, what's bugging me here? Because, and I don't, just to qualify or I guess verify whether this is the same for you. When you said he didn't ask you any questions, that didn't even have to be a separate independent piece where he was in a completely separate swim lane asking all about you. Like if you asked him a question and he answered it, and then you volleyed with something of your perspective on the thing, and he got curious about that, like that even counts, I think, somewhat. I
didn't need a separate paragraph. So who is your ideal client? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying you each bring, if you have a conversation that's more than just surface, you each bring certain life experiences, or, hey, this really occurred to me. Yeah. And if there's no curiosity at all.
Yeah. Like it's the feeling that person is interested to get to know you as I try to be. I mean, I don't walk into a room like dying to know everything about somebody. I just know that, I mean, sometimes I do, depending on what I know about them in advance.
Or the room.
But in those, in those moments, I don't even know enough to know what might be exciting to know about them. But that's the whole sort of discovery of it. I'm like, I look for those little tidbits of like, oh, that's what makes you who you are and what's interesting about you. And that's why I ask the questions I ask. But for me, it's the difference between, I don't know if you ever noticed this difference, but there's some movies that I watch. I mean, okay, some movies are just bad movies that you're just like, that was awful. Then there are movies that are perfectly entertaining and good, and I don't feel like we're a waste of my time, but I don't ever stop being aware that they're movies. In fact, I might even be thinking complimentary things like, oh, what a great job of cinematography, or, oh boy, they're really delivering these lines well.
But you can't lose yourself in.
But I'm not. Versus when I went to see, what's the movie with the blue people? Avatar. It's like a 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, I was like, what? It's over? What? Like I was in a different dimension or something.
And you wonder what the characters are doing now. How did they move on? How did they move on from that?
Like, I miss them. What are they? How are they feeling? Exactly. Like it becomes like, and that to me is that distinction. And when I think of, so that's the movie sort of version of that feeling, that distinction. I think to me, when I think about it in a conversation, there's this metaphor that pops into my mind often of like an electrical circuit where, that classic thing you did as a kid where you have like 2 wires between a battery and a light. You can have one wire and it's a perfectly fine wire and it's connected well on both ends and it goes all the way over, but it's not until the other wire comes back over and completes the connection that you actually have an electrical circuit. And that sort of magic and nuance of what does and does not create that electrical circuit between two people is forever fascinating to me.
It is. And so there are 2 thoughts that I had as you were talking about this. One was that in completing the circuit, you understand a little bit more about somebody. You have a literal, in your example, connection with somebody. And so what that means to me is if after that meeting, something could pop up on my news feed, or whether it's a joke or whether it's an article or whether a book I read, whatever, and I can think to myself, geez, Jody would love that.
Yeah.
Because that means that I actually started to, I might be wrong, but I think I have a sense of who you are, and this might be of interest to you.
Yeah.
And I thought after, and I think Nikki's complaint, and after this networking meeting that I had that prompted the story, my complaint was that wouldn't be possible because there were no questions to uncover.
I'm so glad you came back to that because sometimes someone might hear that story that you told about Nikki and just like you said, think, well, she just wants to be the center of attention. And it's like, no. It's that you feel cheated out of an opportunity to make a connect. And it's not that she wanted to come to Baltimore area and have more people ask about her. It's that she's craving connection, and you cannot have that sense of connection without everyone being curious at both sides. Right.
And, I know you'll laugh at this, but I'm going to take this into a legal analysis. It's shocking.
Surprise.
So in real estate, for example.
And then I'll make a dating or parenting reference, whatever.
So in real estate, for example, if you're buying your house, if a couple is buying their house, there are three ways they can own it. They can own it. The husband could own it entirely. Mm-hmm. The wife could own it entirely, or the marriage can own it. That's called owning tenants by the entireties. And you'll see that on deeds.
So tenants by the entirety doesn't just mean that both people own it. It actually means like a third entity
owns it. It's like the third entity. It's like the marriage itself. So, and the way you know that is if tenants by the entireties, if the house is owned tenants by the entireties, and sometime down the road, the husband has $1 billion judgment against him and he's got creditors and wolves at the door. Well, they can't get that house because the husband doesn't own it. The marriage owns it, the tenants by the entireties. Okay, the reason I bring that up is because I think let's take a networking meeting, you have person A as one entity, person B as a second entity, but then the relationship, whether it's established or new, you have that connection as something that needs to be started and nurtured and fostered. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you walk away and still there are only those two entities from that conversation, A and B, but there's no connection that started as a thing, that's what I think I miss with the absence of questions.
Yeah, that's when they feel empty. Like I walk away, I'm like, I liked that person. And, if I stumbled upon someone who needed them, I would probably refer them, but it's, you lack that, that relationship that then kind of builds into something new. And we're talking about this in a very personal context, but interestingly, I love this tenants of the entire, in the entirety. Is that right?
Tenants by the entirety.
By the entirety. Yeah. I used something very similar, but that was actually pulled from a partnership counseling coaching model that I learned about one time, where it says, if whether it's a couple or two business partners or whatever come in and have an issue, you can coach person A and you say, what does person A need here? Or what does person B need here? But that just inherently leaves them in a place of versus, mine versus yours. And, and so the model is you don't coach person A or coach person B, but what they need, you coach the relationship.
Right.
What does the relationship need? And I use this all the time in team discussions and group discussions where, especially if things have gotten a little feisty, cranky, difficult between people, because what it does is it elevates the conversation to what is the company need?
Yeah,
what is our, if we have some big disagreement on something, if you want to go do this thing with the podcast and I want to do this, if we say, what does the podcast need?
Right. What does our mission need to foster?
Right. It elevates the conversation and the priorities. It doesn't let go of what the individuals in that organization need, but it elevates the perspective in a way that's just a far more useful piece of the conversation. And I think that, that's one way this applies in business. But I also it kind of goes back to the thing you were saying about if I walk away and say oh, Jody would love this article because you know something about me.
Yeah.
It's also the whole reason people network or get to know each other or whatever is so that we can build more things together, help each other with their businesses and whatnot. And if you don't have that sense of someone, Because I'm sitting here thinking like, why would someone care if they're not somebody who tends to be curious? Like, why, like, do they need to be convinced to be curious? Like, if they do, I guess the reason is that the likelihood that you're going to get something out of that. Like, if you're someone who kind of needs to know what's in it for me if I take the time to do these things, it's the likelihood that you'll get what you're actually after becomes exponential, I think.
Well, you had said at the beginning of one of your comments, you said, well, it was fine. I would probably refer business to them, whatever. But actually, and I know you were leading into your main point, so that wasn't your point. But I think the issue is you wouldn't refer to them, not because you would be opposed to it, but because you wouldn't remember them.
Yeah, I'd forget about that.
It would be, water off a duck's back. You'd leave this, and if it's like me, 45 minutes after leaving that conversation, I don't really remember. I remember that we sat down together. I don't remember the conversation. I certainly don't have a sense of what makes the person tick. And okay, so I couldn't find, and maybe it's not important to you, whoever is listening, that, well, it doesn't matter if you find something on your news feed or a book that they'd love. I think Jody would love this. But it would matter that person could say, hey, I think this client would be perfect for Jody.
Yeah.
I think Jody could really help out here.
Well, yeah. Here's where I think of it. I know, I don't even know how many financial advisors I know. I know a lot of them. I think many of us know a lot of financial advisors. I know a lot of realtors. There are certain categories of things where I know a lot of those people. And what's interesting is the ones that I refer to over and over and over again are the ones who I know something about who they are and what they care about and why they do what they do, because that helps me. It's not like I refer to them because I know those things. It's that when I hear stories, I know one financial advisor who's incredibly driven to work with either older women or women who've divorced and because of the way their marriage was structured, didn't know a lot about their finances. Women who don't feel secure in making financial decisions. Mm-hmm. She loves to work with them because she doesn't just want to manage their money for them. She actually wants them to feel less like that. Yeah. And so that they know they're okay on their own. So she has this whole other agenda in with what she does that I really value and respect. So when I talk to someone who's feeling that way, there is no one else I think to refer them to. And it has nothing to do, there may be plenty of people out there who could handle this person I'm talking to's money just fine. They don't even pop into my head because I know this about Dory.
No, and that's very true. And as a matter of fact, this happened to me yesterday. I got a call from a lawyer that I've known forever. I went to law school with him some 30 years ago. And he said, look, I have a client and they have this transaction and I really wanted you to step in because, and he started describing this very contentious family dynamic where you have a family business, bunch of people as stockholders. He said, now there are real issues here and it's tense, but I need somebody who's not going to ratchet it up. I need somebody who can actually calm the waters a little bit and work the relationship just as much as the legal side.
Right.
And I know how you do that.
Yeah.
And so he said, I didn't talk to them about your legal ability because that's the price of admission. Right. You're not going to refer somebody who doesn't know how to do this. He said, so yeah, I said, yeah, he does this, but this is what he does. This is the meat of what he does. And the only reason he thought of me is because we know each other. He knows what I like to do and what my strengths are. And so also, the great part is when I got that call, I was like, hey, this is really something I do want to dig into. Right.
Oh, absolutely. Because then you're super excited.
Yeah.
So we're skipping over one piece of this that is the part that kind of boggles my, let me back up for a second. I know that I'm wired the way I'm wired. You're wired the way you are wired. So anytime I have this perspective of why doesn't everyone do this thing? I'm very aware of people are different and they have different preferences and whatever. So, but in this case, I think on top of that or beside that or whatever, in addition to that, I am sort of boggled that more people don't take the be really curious. And I started to say it's because it actually has very little to do with asking questions. What we're not suggesting. You can correct me if you're wrong. It's not about like points for more questions. Did I say where you're wrong?
You said you can correct me if you're wrong. And first of all,
I got distracted by your face.
Yes, I love that. And I'm going to see if I can use that in conversation, but it did throw me for a minute.
Yeah, I didn't hear myself say it until I saw your head tilt like dogs do, like, what? And then I kind of was trying to talk and rewind at the same time. I'm like, did I just say that? Okay, you can correct me if I'm wrong about what you said, is what I was. So there was like, I cut out a bunch of words there. It's not like you get points for asking more questions. It's not 20 questions. The difference is, now I've almost lost my previous point I was making. This is especially valuable perspective for anyone who doesn't like networking or doesn't like having coffees with strangers, the introverts out there and whatnot. Going this route, like just being curious about another person and about what they think, is easier. It's simpler. If you feel like talking to new people requires that you like tap dance dog and pony show about how great you are, like, and that feels uncomfortable, good. Like, it should feel uncomfortable, because that's not the way to go. I guess my question though is just on that point. My question is, can you fake it? Because you're not talking about, like, if you're not really curious.
Yeah, you're not talking about coming in, let me prepare a list of 7 questions. And these are bullet point questions like, what's your perfect client and how can I help you?
Right.
But can you fake it?
So I don't know how to answer the question, can you fake it? I will say I don't think you should fake it. And here's a little behind the scenes of the way my brain works a little bit. I don't know if this is helpful, but to me, it's almost a selfish thing, because I want to truly, genuinely enjoy the conversation. And I know for that to happen, I need to find out something about this person that makes me genuinely, legitimately interested in the person that they are. So I don't start out curious per se. It's like if you and I were sitting down for the very first time, it's not like I sit down with a raw, pulsing curiosity, like, oh my God, what is Elliot like to do? Like, who's his favorite client? It's not that. It's that I am in search of something that will make me go, oh, cool. That's so interesting. So it's not just about this. I think this is the important thing. It's not just about having a question, because what you don't want to do is jump from question to question to question. It's like curiosity is about digging a little bit deeper down beyond the first question. It's about having a second question and a third question about the thing that you just asked about. And more importantly, sometimes the most valuable ones are the ones that seem kind of dumb, because you actually have an idea of what you think their answer is. And just to make some sense out of that, I know it can be so annoying sometimes on news things where like someone has just suffered through some tragedy and the reporter says, what was that like for you? Right. It seems like an inane question. You kind of want to throw something at the television. And in that situation, it probably is. Your house just burned down. Well, how do you feel? Probably pretty crappy. But in these kinds of situations where you're one-on-one with someone, I have actually found I've rewritten my perspective on that, because when somebody says to me, let's pick something that seems kind of obvious, like, well, I lost my job, or like, well, my marriage ended, or I had to end the business, or whatever. If you ask them, how was that? Like, what was that like for you? Or some question that you think you know the answer to, I have found that is often the most fascinating doorway to actually work, because they might say, well, it stunk, but blah, blah, and then they move on to something else. But sometimes they'll pause because you just asked them a question that no one else has. And if they're really honest, they were relieved that thing ended, or they were excited that they could move on. Like sometimes you get to give them the space to talk about something that they've never talked about, and you get to see a part of them that is way more fascinating than the part you thought you would have guessed if you wouldn't have like paused. So for me, curiosity is more about walking a little bit more slowly in a moment in conversation and looking for little rabbit holes that might be interesting.
Well, I think that two of the things that came out of that for me is, the first is that I think you're right. I think curiosity is about the third question. Because it's not the list of 7 or 10 or 12 questions, no. but it's about, and it may not even be about the second question, but it's about, if you get to the third question, that's where I think you've really started to get into almost either unexplored territory or unexpected territory. Not just what was that like for you, but why, and going further, and what were you relieved about, or whatever that conversation happens to be. So that was the first thing. The second is when I asked, can you fake it? And as you were speaking, I think that one of the points that you were getting to, and correct me if you're wrong, that's a callback. But I think that the answer, or one of the answers really, is that you have to find a set of people or find a circumstance in which you don't have to fake it. If you find yourself faking the need to be curious consistently throughout whatever it is you're doing in your day, then maybe that's one of the chief symptoms that you're not in the right place.
Yep.
Because the more I tailor my schedule and I take control of who I want to spend time with, the less I'm a curious person anyway, but it couldn't even occur to me to have to fake being curious, because I really intentionally meet with these people, or I intentionally go to these events where this group or this industry or this interest is going to be meeting.
Yeah.
And so faking curiosity is the last thing I have to do.
Absolutely. And just to kind of last thought on that, it's when you don't have that zing of a feeling, because interestingly, if I'm curious and I get into a second, third question and somebody's really like coming back to me and we find that vibe, like that avatar kind of vibe, I to kind of counter back on something we're actually saying here, I don't even necessarily need them to be asking much of questions like of me. It doesn't have to be also back my way, but just because we get into this like really fascinating place. But when you don't have that, it's okay to sort of just have that person not be your person. Like we say, like that's okay. Like this is somebody who I just didn't zing with, and that's okay. Because I think for me, something, and I just saw something in my Facebook memories about this, was this period in time where I realized that I actually didn't need to be doing a ton of networking and marketing and all this kind of stuff. I made this decision to try out just spending more time with, I'm always interested in meeting new people here and there, but I didn't need to go out and get 20 business cards I didn't need 20 new friends and new contacts. I need a couple new ones all the time. And I'm always interested in meeting people who I will zing with, but I don't need people who I don't zing with. Like they're not of use to me, and I'm probably not of use to them.
They're not zingable.
Or as you call them, like fist bump people. Is that what you call them? Like the fist bump people. Yeah. So I started just simply spending more time with the people that I just love spending time with. And that one decision changed the structure and size and scalability of my business more than anything else. And so kind of curating for this thing we're dancing around here that happens between two people, whatever it is, whatever word that is that doesn't quite exist, is like how to the practice of creating those conversations, being better about your side of helping those conversations happen, and then giving yourself permission to kind of choose by that, like to curate your network of people by that, not just by adding numbers.
Absolutely. So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories. You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.